I never meant to sign the contract. That is what I told myself for the first 3 months I lived in his house. The house was a glass tower in downtown San Francisco, 37 floors of steel and ambition overlooking a bay that glittered like a promise no one intended to keep. My name is Sera Voss. I am 31 years old. I am a cardiothoracic surgeon. Or I was. Before the hospital where I worked was acquired by a private equity firm, and my position was eliminated along with the entire cardiac research division. Before my father's medical debts consumed everything my mother left us. Before a man named Dominic Ashford appeared in my life with a proposal that was not a proposal, but a contract printed on heavy cream paper with terms where the vows should have been. He needed a wife to satisfy the board of his family's medical foundation. The Ashford Foundation controlled 6 hospitals and 3 research institutes across the western United States. The board had become concerned about Dominic's unmarried status. It suggested instability, they said. It suggested a man who could not commit. The foundation required a particular kind of leadership. Old money. Family values. The appearance of permanence. He needed someone with medical credentials who understood the world, and of course, who could stand beside him at galas and board meetings and the endless social obligations of a man whose name appeared on hospital wings and who would not embarrass him. In exchange, he would pay my father's medical bills. All of them. The past, the present, the future. He would reinstate my research funding through a foundation grant. He would give me back the career his world had taken from me. The arrangement was for 2 years. Separate residences within the tower. Separate lives. No emotional entanglement clause. 7. I signed it because I had run out of things to sell and things to believe in. I signed it because my father was dying in a facility that cost more per month than I had earned in my best year as a surgeon. I signed it because I had spent my entire adult life learning how to open a chest cavity and repair a failing heart, and I could not bear the thought of never doing it again. I signed it on a Tuesday afternoon in his office on the 34th floor, with the bay spread behind him like a blue-gray argument for something I had stopped letting myself want. He did not smile when I set down the pen. Dominic Ashford did not smile. He inclined his head slightly, the way men do when they have received what they expected and are already calculating the next variable. The wedding will be in 3 weeks, he said. My assistant will send you the details. Welcome to the family. The family. I almost laughed. I almost cried. I did neither. I had learned in my years of delivering difficult news to waiting families that composure is not the absence of feeling. It is the decision that feeling will be processed later in private where no one can use it against you. The wedding was held at a private estate in Napa Valley surrounded by vineyards and old oaks and the particular golden light that California produces in late September when the earth has given up its harvest and the air smells like the end of something. I wore a dress that cost more than my first year of medical school. Dominic wore a dark suit and an expression that communicated nothing. We exchanged vows that had been written by a lawyer and reviewed by a publicist. The reception lasted 4 hours. I shook hands with board members and foundation trustees and people whose names I had seen on donor walls. I answered questions about how we met with a story that had been prepared for me, and I did it with the same precision I had once used to describe surgical procedures to residents. We are so happy for you, they said. You make a beautiful couple, they said. He is so fortunate, they said. No one said what everyone in that room understood. This was a transaction. The only difference between this and any other business deal was the white dress and the champagne and the string quartet playing something by Bach that made the whole thing feel almost holy. We left separately. I rode back to San Francisco in a black car with tinted windows. Dominic stayed behind to handle something with the board. I did not ask what. I was already learning that the less I asked, the less I would have to pretend to care about the answers. The tower was quiet when I arrived. My rooms were on the 32nd floor. 3,000 square feet of marble and glass with a view of the Golden Gate Bridge that made me feel like I was floating above the city. There were fresh flowers on the nightstand. White peonies. I had mentioned once at a foundation dinner that I preferred them to roses. I did not remember mentioning it, but someone had remembered. I stood at the window for a long time that night. The city glittered below me, indifferent to the small private revolution occurring 32 floors above its streets. I was someone's wife now. On paper, in the eyes of the foundation, in the careful architecture of a life I had agreed to inhabit for 2 years. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was still myself. I told myself a lot of things in those first weeks. Some of them were even true. The Foundation Gala was held 6 weeks after the wedding. It was my first official appearance as Mrs. Dominic Ashford, and I had spent 3 days preparing for it the way I used to prepare for complex surgeries, with attention to every variable, every contingency, every possible way the evening could go wrong. The event was at the Fairmont Hotel. The ballroom was a cathedral of crystal and gold leaf, filled with the particular kind of people who attend charity galas, because attendance itself is a form of currency. I wore a navy gown that made me look like I belonged there. Dominic wore a black tuxedo and the expression he always wore in public. Composed. Attentive. Revealing nothing. His hand rested at the small of my back with the light, correct pressure of a man who understood exactly how much contact was appropriate for public display and not 1 degree more. Senator Chen will approach within the first 10 minutes, he said near my ear as we entered. He will ask about the cardiac wing at Ashford General. He believes the board is withholding information about the construction timeline. He is correct. But he does not need to know that tonight. I kept my smile steady. And what do you suggest I tell him? That you are honored to be part of the Foundation's work and that you look forward to sharing updates when they are available. A pause. You are remarkably good at saying nothing with considerable elegance. I glanced at him sideways. Was that a compliment? It was an observation. The corner of his mouth moved. Almost imperceptibly. Almost a smile. Senator Chen arrived exactly as predicted. I handled him in under 4 minutes. Dominic said nothing afterward, but when I reached for a glass of champagne from a passing tray, I found one already being offered to me. I took it without comment. The evening progressed in the measured rhythm of these occasions. Introductions, pleasantries, the careful navigation of conversations that were never entirely about what they appeared to be about. I was good at this. I had been trained for it not by finishing schools or etiquette coaches, but by years of delivering impossible news to families in hospital waiting rooms. When you have told a mother that her child's heart cannot be repaired, you develop a particular kind of composure. Everything else feels manageable by comparison. It was Dr. Elaine Morrow who finally said aloud what I suspected much of the room had been thinking. She was a senior cardiologist at Stanford, a woman I had admired from a distance for years. She cornered me near the dessert table with a glass of scotch and an expression that suggested she had questions she was not going to ask directly. "You seem very comfortable in this world," she said. For someone who was elbow deep in a thoracic cavity 6 months ago. I was not aware you followed my career. I follow everyone's career. She took a sip of scotch. The Foundation is lucky to have you. Even if the circumstances are. She paused. Unusual. I met her eyes directly. It is a privilege to be here, Dr. Morrow. I have been given resources to continue my research, and I intend to use them. She studied me for a moment. Then she nodded once. Good. Do not let them turn you into a decoration. She walked away before I could respond. Dominic, who had been standing near enough to hear every word, said nothing until we were in the car on the way back to the tower. Then quietly, she is right. About what? About you. You are not a decoration. The city lights slid across his face through the tinted window. I have been watching you all evening. You handled every conversation with more skill than half the board members. You did not need me to brief you on Senator Chen. You had already read the construction reports. I turned to look at him. How do you know that? Because I read them too. And I saw your notes in the margins of the digital file. You corrected 3 errors in the cost projections. A pause. I did not know anyone else had access to that document. Hay met my eyes. I did not either. The silence that followed was different from the silences we had been manufacturing for 6 weeks. It was not empty. It was full. Weighted with something neither of us was prepared to name. I looked away first. But I did not pull my hand back when his fingers brushed mine on the seat between us. I told myself it was fatigue. I told myself it was the champagne. I told myself I would examine it later. Later, it turned out would arrive sooner than I expected. The storm hit in mid-November. I was at the Foundation's Research Institute in Marin County reviewing grant proposals when the rain started. By the time I emerged from the building at 7 o'clock, the roads were flooding and the bridges were closing, and the local news was advising everyone to shelter in place. My phone buzzed. Stay there. I will come to you. Dominic. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I typed back. The roads are closed. I have a 4-wheel drive vehicle, and I grew up in Colorado. I will be there in 40 minutes. He arrived in 35. The institute was empty by then. The staff had gone home before the worst of the storm. I was alone in the ground floor lobby with my laptop and a cup of cold coffee, and the particular silence of a building that had been designed for discovery rather than habitation. Dominic pushed through the glass doors with rain streaming from his coat and his hair plastered to his forehead and an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not composure. Not calculation. Something rawer. Something that looked like concern. Are you all right? He asked. I am fine, I said. The building is secure. The power is still on. I have been reviewing grant proposals for 3 hours. I am probably the safest person in Marin County. He stood in the lobby, dripping onto the marble floor, and looked at me for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly. Good. That is good. He shrugged off his wet coat and draped it over a chair. The storm is expected to last through the night. We are not going anywhere. We waited in the lobby for a while, but the building's heating system began to struggle against the cold, and the wind was rattling the windows in their frames. I found a maintenance closet with emergency blankets and flashlights. He found a conference room on the 2nd floor with a working fireplace and a leather sofa that had apparently been installed for the comfort of visiting donors. We built a fire. We spread the blankets across the floor in front of the hearth. We sat with our backs against the sofa and watched the flames and listened to the storm rage against the windows. It was the most undressed I had ever seen him. No suit jacket. No tie. His sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hair still damp from the rain. He looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally been given permission to set it down. Tell me something true, he said. I looked at him. What kind of true? The kind you do not tell donors. The fire crackled between us. The storm pressed against the glass. I considered deflecting. I was very good at deflecting. Instead, I heard myself speak. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough and was precise enough and never let anyone see me make a mistake, I would be untouchable. Untouchable, he repeated. Safe. From disappointment. From failure. From the specific kind of vulnerability that comes from needing something you cannot control. Did it work? For a while. Then my father got sick and the hospital was acquired, and I discovered that precision is not the same as power. He nodded slowly. What about you? I asked. What belief did you used to hold? He looked at the fire for a long moment before answering. I used to believe that the truth was always the right strategy. That if you were honest with people and transparent about your intentions, everything else would follow naturally. I am less certain of that now. Why? Because I am currently in a situation where I withheld something important from someone I respect. And I do not yet know if that makes me strategic or cowardly. The fire popped. A log shifted. The storm howled against the windows. I thought about the contract in my desk drawer at the tower. The terms, the clauses, the careful legal language that described our arrangement as if it were a merger rather than a marriage. I thought about the peonies on my nightstand and the notes in the margins of the construction reports and the way his hand had brushed mine in the car after the gala. I thought about the difference between what something was called and what it actually was. I was not confused about that difference, but I was beginning to wonder if he was. The storm continued through the night. We did not sleep. We talked. Not about the foundation or the board or the careful public narrative we were constructing. About real things. About his father who had died when Dominic was 15 and left him an empire he had never asked for. About my mother who had believed I would change the world with my surgical skills and died before she could see me try. About the particular loneliness of being surrounded by people who admired you but did not actually know you. About the difference between solitude and isolation. About which one we were each currently living in. At some point around 3 a.m, the fire had burned low, and we were sitting closer than we had been at the beginning of the evening. Not intentionally. Or perhaps intentionally, but not acknowledged. The kind of proximity that happens when two people have been talking for hours and the space between them has contracted without either of them noticing. I am not good at this, he said quietly. At what? At letting people matter. His eyes met mine in the low light. I have spent my entire adult life managing assets and evaluating risks and making decisions based on spreadsheets and projections. I know how to run a foundation. I know how to negotiate a merger. I know how to stand in front of a board and convince them that I am the right person to lead. He paused. I do not know how to tell someone that they have become important to me in ways I did not anticipate and did not authorize. The fire whispered in the grate. The storm had quieted to a steady rain outside. I looked at him. At the man who had appeared in my life 6 weeks earlier with a contract and a proposal, and the particular certainty of someone who had never been told no. He did not look certain now. He looked like someone standing at the edge of something he had not planned for and could not control. I did not anticipate it either, I said. My voice was lower than I intended. I thought I was signing a business arrangement. I thought I could separate what I was doing from what I was feeling. I thought I was better at compartmentalizing than this. What changed? You looked at me at the gala the way you are looking at me now. When we got home, I told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself I was tired and overwhelmed and that I would feel differently in the morning. The corner of his mouth moved. Did you? No. I felt exactly the same. He reached across the space between us and took my hand. His fingers were warm and steady and entirely certain. I did not pull away. For the first time since I signed that contract on a Tuesday afternoon in his office, I did not pull away. The storm ended sometime before dawn. We did not. The Christmas Gala at Ashford General was the Foundation's most important event of the year. I had been preparing for weeks. The guest list, the seating arrangements, the menu, the wine pairings, the keynote speaker, the press coverage. Every detail managed with the same precision I had once brought to surgical planning. Dominic had been distant in the days leading up to it. Not cold. Not unkind. Simply elsewhere. I had attributed it to the pressure of the event. I was wrong. The gala was held in the hospital's grand atrium, decorated with enough white lights and evergreen garlands to make the space feel almost magical. I wore a deep burgundy gown that I had chosen specifically because it made me feel like myself rather than like a woman playing a role. Dominic wore his usual dark suit and his usual careful composure, but something was different. I noticed it the moment we arrived. He was watching me with an attention that was not performative. The way someone watches a variable they are trying to solve for. The evening was going beautifully. The donations were flowing. The board members were smiling. The keynote speaker, a pediatric cardiologist from Johns Hopkins, gave a speech that moved several people to tears. And then Victoria Lennox appeared. She was a board member's daughter, tall and elegant, with the particular confidence of a woman who had been told her entire life that she was exceptional. She had been at several foundation events before. She had always been polite. Tonight, she was something else. She cornered me in the hallway outside the restroom with a glass of champagne and a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mrs. Ashford," she said. "May I call you Sera?" "Sera is fine." "Sera?" She took a sip of champagne. "I wanted to congratulate you. On the marriage. On the foundation. On how seamlessly you have adapted to this particular role." The way she said role made it sound like a diagnosis. "Thank you," I said carefully. Her smile widened. "You know, Dominic and I were quite close before his father died. His mother and mine had always hoped we would." She trailed off. "Well, things change. Do they not?" She touched my arm lightly. "Enjoy the rest of the evening." I stood in the hallway for a long moment after she left. My heart was doing something I did not appreciate. Not jealousy. Something more specific. The feeling of being examined and found lacking by someone who had already decided what she was looking at. I returned to the gala. I smiled at the right people. I made the right small talk. I stood beside Dominic with his hand at my back and performed the role of the devoted wife with the same precision I brought to everything else. But something had shifted. The next morning, I received an email from an anonymous address. The subject line was simply, "Congratulations." The body of the email was 3 paragraphs of carefully crafted cruelty disguised as friendly advice. It described Dominic's previous relationships in intimate detail. It suggested that our marriage was understood in certain circles to be a transaction of the most transparent kind. It implied that I was a placeholder, a temporary solution, a woman who had been acquired for her credentials and would be discarded when they were no longer needed. I read it 3 times. Then I closed my laptop and sat at my desk and watched the bay through the window. The fog was rolling in through the Golden Gate the way it always did in December. Soft and gray and indifferent. I had signed a contract that clearly stated the terms of this arrangement. I had agreed not to mistake proximity for intimacy. I had agreed to 2 years, and separate residences, and no emotional entanglement. I had agreed to all of it. The problem was that I had stopped agreeing to it somewhere between the storm and the fireplace, and the moment his hand had closed around mine in the dark. The problem was that I had broken my own rules. And I did not know if he had broken his, or if I was simply a variable he was still calculating. I began to withdraw. Not obviously. Not dramatically. I simply started organizing things. I reorganized my research notes. I updated my grant proposals. I made backup copies of files I had not looked at in months. I told myself I was being practical. I told myself I was preparing for the second year of the contract when I would need to transition back to independent work. I told myself I was protecting myself. Dominic noticed within 48 hours. I saw him register at the moment at dinner when I answered a question with fewer words than usual. I saw the slight shift in his attention, the particular way his eyes followed me through the room. He said nothing. But he noticed. On the third morning, he found me in the kitchen at 6 o'clock, staring at the coffee maker as if it had personally betrayed me. "You have been avoiding me," he said. "I have been busy. You have been avoiding me, and you have been organizing things." His voice was very quiet. I do that when I'm preparing for something I do not want to face. I turned to look at him. He was standing in the doorway wearing a gray sweater and an expression I had not seen before. It was not composure. It was not calculation. It was something closer to fear. "What are you preparing for, Sera?" "I received an email 3 days ago," I said. "From someone who seems to know you well. She suggested that I am a placeholder. That you married me for convenience. That I should not mistake my position for something permanent." His face went very still. "Victoria." I did not confirm it. I did not need to. She wrote it. I recognized the language. He crossed the kitchen and stood in front of me. Close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. Close enough that I could see the pulse beating at the base of his throat. "The email is not true," he said. His voice was low and rough and stripped of every professional defense I had ever heard him use. "I know how this began. I know what the contract says. I know what I told myself I was doing when I asked you to sign it." He paused. But somewhere between the gala and the storm, and every conversation in between, I stopped reading the contract. And started simply. He exhaled. "You. Sera, you are not a placeholder. You are not a temporary solution. You are the first person in 15 years who has seen me without the title and the name and the expectations. And you stayed." I said nothing. I could not. He reached for my hands and held them between his own. "I chose you before I knew I was choosing you. And if you will let me, I will keep choosing you. Not because of the contract. Not because of the board. Because of this. Because of us. Because of everything we have not yet said to each other, but both already know." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside the bay was waking up gray and gold and full of light. I looked at him, at the man who had appeared in my life with a contract and a proposal, and the particular certainty of someone who had never been told no. He did not look certain now. He looked like someone standing at the edge of something he had not planned for and could not control. And I realized that I was standing at the same edge. We had been standing there together for weeks without acknowledging it. "I chose you too," I said. Before I knew I was choosing. Before the storm. Before the gala. Before the peonies on the nightstand. I stopped reading the contract long before you did. He kissed me then. Or I kissed him. It was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. It was not like the careful, choreographed kisses we had performed at public events. It was real and unpolished and entirely unrehearsed. It tasted like coffee and relief, and the particular sweetness of something that had been waiting a long time to finally happen. When we pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine and his hands were warm on my face. "I love you," he said. I have never said that to anyone before. Not like this. "I love you too." The words came out steadier than I felt. I have been trying not to for weeks. "I am very glad you failed." I laughed. I actually laughed. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep and unguarded. And he smiled. Not the controlled, almost smile I had cataloged at board meetings and foundation events. The real one. The one that reached his eyes and stayed there. The morning light filled the kitchen. The fog was lifting over the bay. And somewhere in the quiet of a glass tower, 37 floors above a city that knew nothing about either of us, two people who had begun as a transaction stood in the ruins of their contract and held on to each other with the particular certainty of those who have found something no legal document could contain. I never meant to sign it, but I am grateful every day that I did.